Bon, je crois qu'on peut commencer lentement. Donc, avant de laisser la place, je vais faire un peu un mot d'introduction rapidement. So, thank you everyone. Today we have Marwan Yassin and David Beauchemin from the GRAD who will make a presentation on leveraging subword embeddings for multinational address parsing, which I think, if I am correct, is something that has been done with a bigger project with the NTAC project. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. So I will let David and Marwan make the presentation.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for being here on a beautiful summer day. We'll be talking about our latest work on multinational address parsing. So before we begin, let's define what parsing of address parsing is.
There is.
Yes. Okay, so address parsing is the task of assigning a category into each part of an address, each word, if you will. So we'll identify each word as either a street number, a street name, a postal code, for example, and so on and so forth for each part of the address. This is important for other tasks such as record linkage, for instance, in which we would try to see if two entries in a database refer to the same entity by comparing their addresses, or for geocoding, which is basically trying to find a location on Earth based on textual data, and in this special case, an address. There has been a lot of work done in the field of address parsing, and it started with rule-based methods, which are basically rules written by experts, which define the way in which an address should be segmented. There's also probabilistic methods or models that's been introduced, more specifically those that deal with sequences such as hidden Markov models and conditional random fields. And lately, there's been work done using neural networks, both feed-forward neural networks and RNNs, or recurrent neural networks, which currently hold the state of the art in address parsing. On a side note, for those who are unfamiliar with recurrent neural networks, they're basically a neural network that's going to be able to consume a sequence one element at a time and make a prediction for each element. And it's also going to have an autoregressive property, which means that each prediction is going to be based on information from past elements, which are going to be held into what we call hidden states. So just a bit of a side note that's going to be useful later. For multinational address parsing, there's postal, which is a very impressive library written in the C language, which uses a conditional random field model. It also uses quite a bit of pre-processing and post-processing on the addresses in order to make a good parsing. And quite impressively, it's been trained on 1 billion addresses from every country on Earth. Also, as far as we know, there has been no neural network approaches for multinational address parsing before ours, of course. Next, let's talk about subword embedding. So a word embedding is essentially a vector representation of a word. There are two main kinds of embeddings, non-contextual, which are going to produce a vector representing a word independently of its context, and also contextual embeddings such as BERT that are going to take into account the context in which a word occurs. And this is quite important because computers only understand 0 and 1. So in order to train a neural network with textual data, we need to encode it in a vector representation. Subword embeddings are basically similar to word embeddings, except that instead of encoding the word into one vector, we're going to segment the words and we're going to produce vectors for each unit, for each subword unit in this case. For instance, we can go into a character level and produce a vector for each character of the word. We can also use character n-grams, which will basically produce vectors based on a fixed window For instance, if we look at the postal code here, each two characters represents a unit and will be encoded in the form of a vector. There are also byte pair embeddings, which are based on a data compression algorithm called byte pair encoding. I'm not going to go into the details of how the algorithm works, but we have an example here. So the postal code will be decomposed into each character. We also can notice that the ones are replaced by zeros, and more generally, each number would be replaced by a zero. And it would also produce different segmentations for different words based on how the algorithm works. Why did we feel the need to use subword embeddings? Basically, we have a multilingual setting. So we're trying to parse addresses from different countries, and that means different languages. And there are no embeddings right now, non-contextual embeddings specifically, that are multilingual per se. There's what we call alignment vectors, which are going to enable us to project vectors from different languages into the same space. However, that would require detecting the language, the source language, which would be an overhead that we didn't want to use in our pipeline. So we settled for two basic models. We used FastText, which, as we said before, uses n-gram subword embeddings in order to find representations for word that's been trained on, and also for out of vocabulary words, which means that if we ask FastText to produce a word embedding for a word that it hasn't seen during training, or for a word from another language, is going to be able to, since it has the ability to use the subword embeddings. And we've also used multi-BPM, which is an algorithm provided by a library that uses byte pair encoding to produce embeddings, and which has a model pre-trained on 275 languages. So this basically solves the problem of the multilingual setting. If we go into our architecture, so as I said, we use both FastText and multi-BPM. The particularity with multi-BPM is it produces multiple vectors for one word. So in order to find a solution for this, what we did is we recombined these subword vectors for each word into one word embedding using a bidirectional LSTM, which is basically a kind of recurrent neural networks. Okay. Our tagging model. So basically, our architecture is composed of two parts. The first part, which I've just spoke about and concerns embeddings. The other part is what's going to actually do the downstream task of produce the tags for the address. And for that, we use a sequence-to-sequence model, which is an encoder-decoder architecture based on recurrent neural networks, and it's composed of a one-directional, one-layer LSTM for both the encoder and decoder. Also a fully connected layer that's going to be able to map the representation of the address into the tag space dimensionality, and finally a softmax activation. It may seem a bit too much, especially for those that are unfamiliar with RNNs or sequence-to-sequence models, but we have an illustration here. So basically, if we go from the beginning, let's take, for instance, the word l'université here, which is going to be decomposed using the byte pair encoding method or algorithm, produce a vector for each part of the decomposition, which we're going to assemble here using an LSTM, and is going to produce one vector here, which is our representation of the word. And the second part here is our encoder for our sequence-to-sequence model that's going to take the representation of each word and produce what we call a context vector here. that is going to be a representation of the entire address, and the decoder here will finally produce the tags one step at a time. So that's pretty much it for the architecture. We move into the data, which is going to be presented by David. I don't know if you're ready, David.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. You just need to stop sharing, and I will share for the rest of the presentation.
Perfect.
Yes. Okay. I will cut the camera since my office now is in construction, so I need to be in another room. So it's not the video because it's kind of awkward now. Do everyone see the presentation right?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, perfect. So for the next part, I will explain what data did we use for the training of our model. So we built data using the open source data on which the postal model were trained, but we choose a little bit less data. We only choose 61 countries. The reason being, in some cases, we were not able to get a minimum number of tags such as street number, street name, municipality, and province. So for that reason, we choose not to take those countries. And on the contrary of the postal, we use only 8 tags. That reason being that's for general purpose of all the address around the world. Using 20 tags, such as the postal, it's kind of difficult to get every part. So we choose to just reduce a little bit and concentrate more on what is more general tags using for every address in the world. So we have street number, street name, unit such as appartement 2 or unit 2, municipality for the city, the province, the postal code, the orientation such as east, west, south, east, and general deliveries such as for more rural countries, rural cities. Here's an example of address and the pattern that we found in the dataset. We use 5 different address patterns and one for each color. And there's another one composed of more than one pattern, such as, let's say you have a country, you can put the street number, street name, unit, or you can put the street number, street name, no, it's the same thing, street name, street number, or any other composition of the 5. For the data, here we can see the 20 countries that we use for the training data and the holdout test set. So we split it 20 countries for the training. And here we can see that we have mostly the red structure and the brown structure, and only one of South Korea. Those countries, we chose those 21 based on the number that they had of example. So we cut it at 100,000. Every country with upper data and that was chosen for the training data, and the rest was used for another part later that we will split later. So here we have the table here is the number of data for the holdout. So we only use 100 per country, so 20 times 100. And the rest is only used for after the model was trained to verify what is the capacity of the model, of the 2 models. So we try to explore the zero-shot transfer learning of our models. So we choose 41 countries based on the number of examples that he had, as explained before. And here we can see that we have a little bit more structure. So we still have the brown one and the red one in a lot of presents, but we have no color, such as Belarus or Uzbekistan. And we have India that have a unique structure. And we have Japan and Kazakhstan that have kind of unique structure based on only the 2. There are other countries with those kind of structure, but in our example, just as I said, we only have those. For the experiment now, this will be the more technical slide for this slide. We have a lot of terms that maybe if you're not familiar with machine learning, some word may not be, but we think that is out of the scope for the presentation. So we train 5 times each of our models, so 5 times FastX, 5 times BPM. The reason being to have a mean and a variance over precision. They were trained during at most 200 epoch with a batch size of 248 example. We also use a early stopping with the passing of 15 epochs. So let's say that after 15 epochs, no progression was done, the learning is stopped. We start a learning rate at 0.1 and a rate scheduler as with decreasing learning rate with a factor of 0.12 after 10 epoch without loss decrease. We use the cross-entropy loss for stability, and we use the SGD, stochastic gradient descent, for the optimizer. And finally, to help the learning, we use teacher forcing, which consists of, instead of using since we use a sequence to sequence model, the normal approach is to use the tag or the tag just given before by the models, but instead of using the tag, we use the ground truth to help the model train faster. Everything was done using Putin framework. And now for the results, the multinational evaluation. So for this part, this is the older data set of the training country that we use for the training. So as we can see, we achieve pretty good results with either FastTech or PPM. The best one being FastTech that give the best performance across the board without considering the standard deviation. We can see that 99 out of 20 FastTechs outperform BPM. And the best result being with South Korea at 99.99 or 99.96, depending of the approach. We will discuss later the reason that we hypothesize why those results are really good. But one point to point out, you can see that for BPM, there's a great standard deviation. The reason being that we had one experiment with a particular seed that achieved poorest result than the rest, and since the learning stopped after one epoch. So without using this example, the scoreboard really changed in the advantage of BPM. So one can optimize the model to get better result using BPM by selecting some model, but in general, it's easier to train FastTechs than BPM. But you can obtain better result by BPM if you choose just a correct seed, but it's a little bit harder to converge this approach. So, like I say, when using standard deviation, BPM achieve better results because in most of the time, for one time, the result was porous. And we can find with BPM that 3 out of the 5 times of the training, there's an accuracy of 100% for South Korea. The reason, so for that, we try just a little bit further why South Korea achieves so high accuracy. And if we take 6,000 South Korean address and we either use a red or brown sequence, so just removing the tag order, and we with equality, so 3,000 for each for brown, 2,000 for red, the mean accuracy really dropped fast at 28.05. And if we use random tag procedure, we achieve 12.29 accuracy. So that means that our models tends to have really learn a pattern. And the reason being that for South Korea, the address always starts with the province and after the rest of the address. And there's only 19 provinces in South Korea. So if we have example, and since we have example of both the province in the training and the test, the model have achieved to just overturn and memorize the pattern. And that show the mean accuracy drop when we arrange the pattern, that show that the model, since he doesn't know the correct embedding, because we are using FastTech's French embedding, the model achieved really poor results when we rearrange the term. So he really have memorized all the pattern for South Korea. Now for the zero-shot evaluation. this is the biggest table I ever did for results. There's 41 countries, so that's a lot of results. First of it, you can see that fast text tend to have better results. BPM in some cases have better results, near 1 to 3% better in some cases. Most of the best results are achieved with fast text. But the interesting thing, if we just look at a macro level, 19 out of 41, so almost 50% of the countries get state-of-the-art performance. So we can achieve SOTA result with 50% without having seen this particular language or the particular sequence. So that gives really good hope of that. And if we take so the state-of-the-art performance is more than 90% accuracy and 35 for BPM. And if we take now the result greater than 80%, we can get 34 out of 41 good performance for the country. So that means that we can obtain good results in almost 80%. So 8 out of 10 times we can get a good precision tag, a good prediction for the tag for a country that we did not see during training. And the lowest results have been below 70% occur for the country where the address pattern and the country official language were not seen in the training. So data such as India, Hungary, and Japan. So that's basically said that it's kind of normal because our model did not have the opportunity to see that kind of pattern and that language, and it's really far from the base language that we use, which is French. So from Japan to French, it's difficult to have like a transfer of the embedding for that, but we still achieve okay results with, as we can see for Japan, 41, which is a little bit higher than random, but not that much too, and not SOTA too. An interesting for Hungary and Japan, the poorest results are all mostly due to the address structure, which is blue, and is the near inverse of the two most present one, red and brown. So it's the never seen structure and language, like I said, but it's also an almost perfectly inverse pattern of the two dominant ones. But as we see for Kazakhstan, which achieved near 80% performance, it used the same patterns as Japan, but achieved better results because the presence of one official language, which is Russian, is present in the training dataset. So the model achieved to learn some representation without understanding clearly the language, but it achieved to predict good tags. But if you don't have the language and the structure, it is really more difficult for our model to perform. So in conclusion, the next step that future work that we want to achieve with this work is using of attention mechanisms and the dominant visual training techniques such as DAN and ADAN, where we will use a little sample of every data set we have a target and we try to with a target and with a different language try to predict it and train with it. So in conclusion, we tackled the multinational address parsing problem with SOTA results using 20 countries, and we showed that Subword embedding helps to solve the multi-language aspect of our task. We also explored the possibility with zero-shot transfer across country and achieved interesting but not yet optimal results for 41 other countries, which was being shown at the end. And if you want to get more information about a full work, which some part was not presented here, you can see on you can read the full article at the actual link here. And we would like to acknowledge also this research was held, as Christian said, as well with the intact with the support of Intact and the Research Council of Canada Engineering. We would also like to acknowledge François Laviat and Luc Lamontagne for the help and mentorship in this research, and our colleague of the GRAL for the comment and reviews. And thank you to assist our presentation. If you have any question, we'll be available for any further question.
Thank you, Marwan and David. I don't know, is there any questions? You may start by raising your hand in the chat.
I have a question, if
Yeah.
it's possible.
Yes, it is.
In fact, I don't know if you do this or not, but what about missing tag in your test set? So if you have some missing tag, do you like see this problem, or you have direct like the same number of tag in test and training? So if you have some missing tag in your test, how you deal with this problem?
In that case, do you want to go, Marwan?
Yes, I can go if you want.
Okay.
What do you mean exactly by missing tag in our test set? Because
for instance, if you have 5 tag in like example of one of this country with 5 tag, and in your test you have only 4, so you have one that by I don't know by error or you don't have it this value. So how you deal with this problem?
well, it doesn't really matter because in the test set we only have addresses and we're predicting the tags. So if for instance a street number is missing, the model should be able to account for that. Is that what you mean by the question?
Yes. So if you don't have, for instance, street name, so with the model, he will like what is the value? What is the tag of the street name that result from your model? Because
Well,
you will parse this address. So what is the value that you will put for this?
it wouldn't put any value because what the model will do is going to take each word in the address and assign a tag for it. So for instance, if you have an address, mettons 23 Rue de l'Université, for instance, and you don't have the 23, you just have Rue de l'Université, the postal code, is going to predict that Rue de l'Université is the street name and that the postal code is a postal code, but it's not going to account for the street number.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
Is there other question?
Maybe one quick question. Is this work has been submitted or published in a conference? You say it is on archive, but is it going elsewhere?
Yes, it is at conference. We are waiting for the review. Should be something about September.
Okay, good. Good,
Thank
because
you.
that's quite interesting. Any other questions? Okay, so if there is no more question, I think this might be clear. So thank you very much for making the presentation. That was quite interesting. And I think, Isen, correct me, we have a presentation next week also? I think so.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, the 2 upcoming week we have presentations, and then we will take a short break before like September to resume again.
Yeah.
So we will have next week and the week after also.
So the next 2 weeks we still have presentation, and then we will resume in September.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
Great. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Merci David et Marwan, c'est très bien.
Merci.